What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Mean Enough Podcast. I'm Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite directors and the deeper meaning within their films. And this episode, we're doing another Hispanic, another Latino director, because last week we did J.A. Bayona. This week we're doing Alfonso Cuarón, Mexican director, pretty famous director, I would say so, especially the last recent years. And we're going to talk about all his films, or the vast majority of his films. We're going to get into it. Oh, yeah. But let's get into something first, guys. As you can see, there is a rivalry brewing within the Mean Enough podcast.
Los Angeles Lakers.
Hey, Phoenix Suns. I'm wearing this gear, my hat and my shirt, my Suns shirt, in defiance, in protest of this awful trade that has happened. LeBron James
coming to the Los Angeles. Yo, this is the best news that LA has gotten since Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor. This is what we needed in the city. We Kobe was our former GOAT. You know, our respect to him. He retired. We had one generation of GOATs. Now we have the next. LeBron James coming to Los Angeles.
I feel like this is like the most villainous thing that anyone could ever do.
Hey, man.
Joining the Lakers, not even doing it for championships, because you're still not going to beat the Warriors, especially not with DeMarcus Cousins.
Come on.
How the heck? Everyone's like, "Ooh, championships." I'm like, bro, you have no shot against the Warriors.
Does Cleveland have a shot?
You still can't even
have a shot without LeBron.
You still can't even. You probably won't even beat Houston. I'm telling you, man.
Bullshit.
First round elimination.
LeBron's gonna carry
in the playoffs. Lakers are out in the first round.
Nah, LeBron's gonna carry us to the finish line. I feel like this is the difference, man. When he was on Cleveland, he was surrounded by he was a 10 out of 10 player. He was surrounded by a bunch of fours, you know.
Who do you have now, man?
Hey, man, who do you have now? Lakers is a bunch of fives, so I feel like we're gonna have a good shot at this. You know?
Who's gonna be like LeBron's second support go-to guy?
Hey,
no one.
You saw Lance.
Lance is not even that great, bro. Kevin Love is probably better than Lance.
JaVale
McGee, the most freaking disappearing guy from the Warriors roster. He plays like 10 minutes a game and scores 6 points maybe.
He comes in and handles his business.
Don't
forget our young talent, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzman, Lonzo Ball.
Lonzo's probably not staying, man.
Hey, man, we don't live it out, baby. Big baller, Brand. Let's go. Let's go.
No. I'm against this, guys, and I'm making it very clear. But to be fair, I am very curious to see a Suns Lakers game, and I'm gonna see it with you.
We're gonna have to,
and I'm gonna be booing in your ears so hard.
Yeah, but
when the Suns beat the Lakers.
This is that's not
the new Suns, bro. Okay. Come on, new Suns.
Who's Ayton?
We got Booker.
I've heard none of these.
We got Jackson. We got Fultz. Come on, bro.
Nah, man, come on now.
Come on.
This wasn't planned, by the way. If you're watching on YouTube, me wearing the Lakers, the Suns wasn't planned at all. I had
to do it, man. Let's read last week's comments from last week's episode, which did all right. I mean, it's fine. At this point, we're just accepting it, guys. We love our few viewers out there, and if you love us, then leave us a comment on the YouTube channel. We know that you probably watch or listen, on iTunes, but just to show some support, you can head over to YouTube, give us a like, give us a comment, just so we can, compete against other SK Plus people who are tripling and quadrupling,
especially when they start stealing our show ideas. Are we talking about that yet?
Shots fired, man.
All right, we'll have to see about that.
RB3 is going after multiple people, man. You're spraying everybody down, bro.
I'm like LeBron.
Everyone,
LA,
man.
Bro. By the way, I can't wait for LeBron to get in that Space Jam 2. Now he's in LA. He's close to Warner Brothers.
See, man, this is the stuff that doesn't matter. What should matter is championships. But LeBron is concerned about Space Jam. Man, such a selfish move, LeBron. You just care about your money.
4 years.
Being a mogul. Come on, man.
$23 million a year.
Wasted the Series says, I'm with RB3 with Fallen Kingdom.
Hey.
It pushes the franchise forward into something new, or even an evolution of the series. We are never going to get the feeling of the original. That is a fact. As soon as we accept that, nothing can recapture that magic. We can move forward into the next stage of the Jurassic Park world universe. Sure. I guess now it's like a silly popcorn, super dumb movie. That's
just how I always felt. Yeah, that's how I always felt about it, bro.
I know you, but as like a Jurassic Park fan, it hurts, man. It hurts. I also gotta say, I texted you. J.A. Bayona liked our episode on Twitter, which is the biggest thing we've ever gotten before.
Hey man, I've been telling y'all, man.
And I was like, yes, we got a like from the director we're talking about. And I'm like, don't watch the episode.
That's probably the one we fucked up the most out of like all of our episodes. Like,
I just trashed Jurassic World. I didn't even think it was that bad.
You didn't. Okay, I feel like trashing is different.
Yeah, I didn't really trash it.
You didn't trash it.
I just didn't like most of the script, and I said that Bayona wasn't the fault of it. So.
Hey, look, I mistook Bryce Dallas Howard and Jessica Chastain the entire episode. So.
Oh my gosh, that was pretty bad. All right, that was pretty bad.
I was just saying, like, hope you didn't see that one.
Neil Varma says, love it. Thanks, man. Yasir Velez says, thumbs down emojis all the way. And it's like, all right.
Hey, much love to you.
Cool, man. I don't know what you're referring to, but
they might be talking about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom.
I think he's talking, I don't know. He could be talking about us. You never know. It's a mystery, guys. This is the mystery of the comment section. Jonathan Peck says, I have a hypothetical question that surrounds monster films. Pacific Rim, Godzilla, Jurassic World, Kong. Why are some of the audiences have issues with films that I just mentioned? They came for monsters, so what's the problem? I can start this one. I can say that for me personally, the problem is, I said it on Twitter. I don't understand the need to already take a monster film, something that you want to see for spectacle, and say, oh, this is a big monster movie. Let's make it stupid AF. Let's make it the dumbest shit ever. Which to me is so limiting to your audience and to a franchise. You can make a big, crazy, blockbuster monster movie and not necessarily make it so dumb to the point that only 7 or 8-year-olds are going to enjoy it. You can do both. I don't understand why people think that you can, you got to do it all the way dumb or all the way smart. Why can't you put some crazy monster fights and then make some crazy, interesting sci-fi story to go with it? That's me personally. Even though I like Pacific Rim,
I like Pacific Rim too.
Every other film on there, I don't.
Wait, is that the new King Kong and the new?
Oh, I did
Godzilla?
not like the new King. That movie is.
Oh, Skull Island.
Oh yeah. I hated that movie, and I know everyone loved it, but for me, I was like, gosh, this is so bad. But that's just me because I don't understand the need to like. Oh, that's crazy. Let's just make it a little stupid, or let's just make silly jokes. And guys going, "Blah." Like, I don't understand that. For me, I feel like you can do both. You can do a crazy monster fight and an interesting story to back it up too.
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of these movies have been doing recently, particularly with Skull Island and Pacific Rim, I think they really go back to like those B movie kind of aesthetics from like the older monster movies, like the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're really adapting that and like modernizing that to a certain way. So like they're holding within their own genre, I feel like. But I mean, I thought Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom like wasn't that dumb, you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I thought they had some interesting stuff.
You
to
thought
say.
The first one was dumb.
Yeah, the first one was like Airhead, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, I feel like that was a different problem in the fact that it wasn't because it was a monster movie. I think it was just because they knew people were gonna watch a Jurassic World. And I mean, that was coming right at the height of like Force Awakens, Creed.
Sure.
So that was just one in like the cycle of like 5 or 6 like reboots that came out that year.
Sure.
But by far it was like the dumbest because like they just didn't have like anything to say because they just knew people were going to see it, The trend was helping them. For this one, I feel like they knew that people were going to watch this too, but at least they sprinkled in just some hints of, some interesting sci-fi. Maybe it didn't like pay off for a lot of people, but like I thought it was pretty.
Yeah, it's actually very split, and we talked about it last week too. How the movie is very split, more split than I even thought last week. I've been reading more comments, and I'm like, oh, I guess I feel like I'm in the minority.
No, you're not
but I'm not.
No,
I'm just split because there's a very much
50,
a split.
50.
One more comment. Straight Edge Vegan Bell.
Hey, great name.
That's
like
me.
that's Ace,
I am also straight edge Vegan Bell. Says, I consider not seeing the movie because I really didn't like the last one at all, but I knew it had to be better, and wow, I really liked it a lot better. Actually really enjoyed it, and I will definitely be seeing the next one. There you go. People like that. That's you.
Yeah.
Let's move on to this week, where we're talking about Alfonso Cuarón. I've also said before that this is our kind of second Hispanic director. Obviously, you know, Bayona's from Spain, Spanish,
yeah.
And he's Mexican. So it's a little bit different, and the film cinema is very different as far as filmmaking when it comes to Spanish cinema and Mexican cinema. But at the same time, I feel like this is a cool little, you know, thing that we can keep doing. I feel like it's cool that we can keep doing it.
Yeah.
Support
who's next?
Latino directors.
Yeah, Ignorantu is probably is that how you pronounce it?
Alejandro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He always kills
Alejandro
pronunciations,
Inarritu. For me, dude, honestly, like, and I'm gonna say it right now, like, that to me is like the most. I'm not gonna. It's a name. It's like, well, you gonna say it in Spanish. Their name is in Spanish. Like, for people who are like, oh, I don't get it. Like, I got so many of those comments when I was on the Schmo Show, and I would never understand it. I'm like, you understand that their name is, it's right. It's not an English name, bro. So that's why I will keep doing that.
Well, I apologize in advance for probably referring to him as Alfonso Cuarón. You know, I don't have much,
it's fine. I don't like, people shouldn't get mad about that.
Yeah.
But we're doing this in honor of Mexico's elimination of the World Cup. I'm kidding, guys. I'm kidding. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. We gave it our all. We even dyed our hair. Yeah. Everyone dyed their hair in defiance against Brazil, and we still lost. You know, Neymar, come on, man, get up. Stop crying.
Hey, he was
get
crying
up.
in that field. I saw it this
morning.
Did you see
it?
Yeah.
Oh, man, get up, bro. Come on, man.
Hey, but I thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. Man, I don't know if they would have, if Mexico would have won today like that, combined with the LeBron news, bro. Like, downtown would have been on fire by
That's
now,
true.
Bro. Like,
that's true.
It's
so funny because they showed ESPN showed like live coverage of like the Lakers fans react to the LeBron news, and it's all Mexican dudes, and they're doing like the crazy like, they're all Mexican dudes, and I'm like, yep, that's Lakers fans. that's LA, man.
Hey,
which I think is great. And that's why we're doing Alfonso Cuarón, who is an Oscar-winning director. He's, you know, he's one of the three musketeers, you know, Guillermo del Toro, Alejandro Inarritu, and then Alfonso Cuarón, who are all, you know, close friends, and also all very successful Oscar-winning directors, which to me is kind of crazy. But I think that's so fascinating. And I actually heard the story. I highly recommend you guys check out Alfonso Cuarón's hour-and-a-half interview / masterclass for the Cannes Film Festival. It's on YouTube. He basically tells his whole life story and talks about how he met certain people, what inspiration he has for certain aspects of shooting a film and all that. It's incredibly interesting, and if you're a fan of this guy, I highly recommend checking it out. But he said the story of how he met Guillermo del Toro, and it's so funny how they were doing like a short film thing, and he heard about Guillermo del Toro because Guillermo del Toro is from Guadalajara, and Alfonso Cuarón is from DF, which is Mexico City, the capital. Which is like different, if for anyone who's Mexican or anyone who knows anything about Mexico, it's like a different world in Mexico City, because my dad lived there for a bit, and it's crazy. It's just like, it's all about art and doing stuff and being powerful within your community. But it's funny because he says like the first time I met the guy, and I knew who he was, and we were both like fans of each other because we knew like where we were going in that kind of sense. And he says, like, the first time he met him, he, like, saw his short, and he's like, oh, yeah, that's, like, a Stephen King, right? It's, like, a Stephen King inspiration. And he's like, yeah, man, that's cool. I didn't know anyone would pick up on that. And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm a big fan of Stephen King. But why did it suck, though? And he's like, whoa, I just met you, bro. But and then Guillermo del Toro started, like, telling him, like, what he can do better and stuff. And then from then on, he said, we became best friends right after. So it's kind of funny to see people who rise up within the talent. I talked about it last week, but for me, it's incredibly important to have communities. There's so many in the African American community, black filmmakers, you know, helping each other out and like getting different aspects and having different inspirations. And I feel the same thing should and could happen and kind of happens within the Latin American community, especially with someone like a Del Toro who, you know, mentors other directors and helps out other directors like Bayona, like
Andy
Muschietti, who did it. And you can have that, you know, talent finds other talent, but, you know, but help other Latino people who are coming up and stuff like that. To me, that's so, like I said last week, it's the most important thing that a successful person can do, is mentor the upcoming or the young into the next generation. Like, that to me is so important. That's why I found that Cuarón is sort of doing that too, specifically with his son, which is kind of biased, because his son is trying to get into directing.
Jonas Cuarón. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, it's interesting, but he's a very interesting guy to say the least. And his first film is his first feature film. He did a lot of shorts, but his first feature film is a film called Solo con tu pareja. And RB3 loves this movie, bro. I always throw shit.
You always throw me under the bus, man.
I'm sorry, man. Like, one of these days I'm not gonna do that, but today is not that day, RB3.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough tracking down those like first movies.
Sure,
you know what I mean.
It is very tough. I actually, like, if you go on Google, which I did, and you type in like "watch Solo con tu pareja," it's hard. They're like the first page, you don't see anything. They're just like not even like illegal downloads or anything. That's how small this movie is.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube.
But unfortunately, they don't have subtitles.
But RB3 found it too late. Thanks, man. No, I'm kidding.
I also can't read if it doesn't have subtitles.
I know. Yeah.
Hey, man.
So unfortunately, guys, that is a movie that we will be checking out after this podcast, which you can do as well.
We might release a review of that as a bonus clip. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because I think it lays a lot of it relays a lot of foundation. I think, especially when we talk about his later film "Y tu mamá también."
Yeah.
It probably lays a lot of foundation when it comes to the mixture of comedy, romance, all that stuff. So
sure. And it's a Spanish-speaking film, which I feel like that's
crucial.
Because I feel like there has to be certain distinctions, and we'll talk about them. But when you do a film in your language and your native tongue versus a film that's, an American film. Speaking of that, tell me about the next film he did, which is Little Princess.
A Little Princess, yes. This is a 1995 remake of the Shirley Temple classic, The Little Princess, that came out in 1939. And this movie is about this young girl, who grew up with a military father who traveled to a lot of different countries and land. They're British, but this takes place in the early teens, so they're obviously like World War I's happening. So her father is shipped off to to battle, while she is left back in I think she's dropped off in New York to like do schooling, to be in school, being like one of those boarding school type of situations, again like 1914 or whatever. Long story short, her father dies in battle, and she's just kind of left on her own to her own wits. And it's really a story of like taking your imagination and like and using that to like fully realize like who oneself is, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Because a lot of times in the the movie kind of starts with this story of the Rama and like very traditional Indian traditional Indian / Hindu tales, and how that influences her perspective and broader look at life. Because even you look at this film and you look at the kids that are surrounding her, they're all very rich, all very privileged, but then they're all being served by like these little black girl, or like this one little black girl in particular. And she being from India, she's more exposed to like a more diverse type of people, and she wonders why this little girl's being treated differently than like the rest of the girls and stuff like that. So it's all very fascinating. It's much more about a movie about life, about perspective and all that kind of stuff. So and it's, like I said, it's an update. It's a remake of the 1939 movie from Shirley Temple, which obviously does have a lot of those more offensive elements, but doesn't address them in any kind of way. You know what I mean? Like the side characters and all that kind of stuff it's not a factor. Whereas this movie kind of highlights the power and like diversity and all that kind of stuff too. So
yeah,
I appreciate it.
I feel like that's a running theme in kind of all of his movies, most of his movies.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to culture and background, and where you come from, and different societies working together or not working together.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like it compares to the original? Because you mentioned it a little bit, how the side characters aren't really part of it. But do you feel like...
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those. I mean, I remember watching a lot of Shirley Temple stuff when I was young because my great grandma just like loved that stuff. And if, it's not really like much of a story, I guess, in the original kind of tell, but and this movie, you know, the original movie is called The Little Princess because it focuses on like this little girl, you know, Shirley Temple or whatever. But this movie is called A Little Princess because it encourages everybody can be their own, you know, like there's a quote early on in the film where they ask like can anybody be a prince? Can anybody be a princess? And yeah, or something along that line. But essentially, the whole theme of the movie is that anybody could be every woman is a princess in and of herself. You know what I mean? So it's a dope kind of inspirational kind of, and it's a very much a kids movie too.
Sure.
Very much G-rated, like kids. You know, it's not much, you know, like being, you know, but it's also a representation of like how kids develop and mature based on where they're from and how they see the world.
Did you see the Mr. Rogers documentary?
I have not yet. No.
Oh, damn,
no.
dude, I saw that over the weekend.
Yeah,
I wanted to say something about it too, but yeah, I mean, the whole film is about, you know, a child, you know, how a child perceives content, basically,
right,
media.
right.
News, whatever it is that's being said on the television. So it's very interesting in that aspect. But it's funny how that becomes a part of it because you learn certain things as children, right? So that's always a part of growing up, is what you're taking in, what you're consuming, or who you're around is how you develop certain stigmas and certain, you know, aspects or perspectives in society.
Right.
Which is a conversation that I had with a friend of mine after the movie. Because that's incredibly important, because there's so many people who grow up with their same community, same faces, and they never see other cultures, and that's why they associate so many negativity towards those cultures, is because you've never met this person, or you've never met this kind of person, whether it's different race or different religion, and or you know whatever it may be. I feel like that's incredibly important because that guides it changes your perception of that individual very much. And I'm going on a tangent. I'm sorry, guys.
No, I mean, no, that makes a lot of sense. And especially I think that applies to a movie like this because, you know, after losing her father, who was the only like living family member she had, she's basically on her own. She's like isolated throughout this entire thing. And you know, she relies on the people around her, you know, because obviously the teachers are mean and all that kind of stuff. So she relies on making friends with the other little girls around her to kind of, you know, prop herself up and have somebody, you know, share with, you know what I mean? So, and I think that's something that even carries on into, you know, when Cuarón did the Harry Potter films, and I think that's all. The Harry Potter Prisoner of Azkaban is also very much a movie about isolation, particularly surrounded by a bunch of school people that you live with all the time, you know, so just fascinating how they approach that.
I'm curious to see. First of all, does the film hold up? Do you feel?
This one?
Yeah, 95 came out.
I mean, like, it's beautiful to look at. I mean, when you know the early parts in India is very clear that's shot like a soundstage.
Sure.
You know, so that's not looking, you know, the best. But I mean, if for a kids movie, I mean, a lot of kids movies is kind of, you know, age how they age. But this was nominated for 2 Oscars for best cinematography and best art direction. So it wasn't, you know, not, but on the technical side, I think, you know, it still stands up and everything too. And I think, you know, what I have to say stands up as well. So,
I'm gonna say something that I'm not sure of, but I'm gonna look through the cast, and I believe the reason why is that Emanuel Lubezki is
the DP
for every Cuarón film, and I believe he did this one as well. That's right.
Lubezki, yeah.
How can you not nominate? Right. The guy is like a DP legend, currently a DP legend and still a legend. Like, the guy is honestly one of the best DPs.
Oh, without a doubt.
Working in Hollywood today.
Yeah.
Like, everything he does, you're just like, oh, this camera work is insane. Like, that's me rewatching Children of Men. I was like, oh. Yeah. Like, I forgot how many wonders are in that movie. But that's a funny thing you mentioned, is the fact that Lubezki, another guy that Cuarón met, just developed that relationship, working Mexican to Mexican, Latino to Latino, and deciding to do films together, pretty much every film together except for Prisoner of Azkaban. I think he didn't do that one.
No, he didn't do that one, no.
But it's one of those things where it's like those relationships develop, and iron sharpens iron, man.
Yeah.
Quality sharpens quality. Like, if you can get a dope ass DP and work with him, like, that's the stuff we've seen with like other famous directors. Like, that's Coogler with what's his name, the freaking composer.
Ludwig.
Ludwig, yeah. Ludwig Göransson. That's his name. Yeah. But that's that. That's whatever relationship you want to associate with it. It's very interesting when those relationships become, you know, Oscar winning because you're working together, which is one of the most, to me, you know, forefront. The first thing you see, the first thing you notice, the first thing you consume when you're seeing an Alfonso Cuarón film is the camera work. And at the end of the day, that's credit to Lubetsky, but at the same time, that's the first thing you consume. In my opinion, I feel like even just a random moviegoer is going to notice the difference between a crazy giant Marvel film and a Lubetsky film, which is going to be a ton of wonders, a ton of crazy shots, a ton of tracking shots. But that to me is the first thing you take in when you watch a Cuarón film. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, especially when it comes to a lot of the bigger budget, you know, films that he's involved in.
Yeah, speaking of bigger budget, his next film is a film called Great Expectations, RB3. And this film stars Ethan Hawke and everyone's favorite super vegan gel lady, Gwyneth Paltrow. I feel like Gwyneth Paltrow is almost like a punching line now. I don't know why that became that way.
I don't know.
Huh?
I mean, I feel like Iron Man 3 did it.
That's true.
I don't know. She's always been a joke before Iron Man, though, too, right? Like,
I don't know. I feel like this is new. Like, since when does everyone hate Gwyneth Paltrow?
I mean, I know for me, like, when she was in Iron Man 3 and she put on the suit, I'm like, oh, this is... You know, this is a little too much, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Gwyneth Paltrow, man. But tell me about this movie, RB3, because I know that you're also a massive fan of this one. Yeah, I always say that, but no, seriously,
I've seen
this
one
one
a long
is
time ago.
This one's pretty rotten on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, it's not like the most.
No, I think it's 30%. Last I checked.
Oh, really?
It's pretty low.
I mean, I don't know what the whole story behind this one is. I mean, I remember watching this like as a young, probably not young, but like in middle school or something.
Yeah.
And it's based on like that famous book, right?
Yep, Charles Dickens novel.
Yeah, right.
Or tale, I guess is what they call it.
And you know, a lot of what Charles Dickens wrote about was like Marxism, revolution, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure this movie like concerns itself in a lot of those kind of themes too. I mean, to be honest, I'm not like completely sure of like the entire like, you know, plot, and I don't have much of a detailed analysis on this one because I haven't watched this one more recently. But
sure,
you know, with any Charles Dickens kind of tale, it's supposed to be about the poor versus the rich. You know, like the dynamics in class and structure. And I feel like that's something that Cuarón also tackles in a lot of his movies too.
Yeah, I feel like, what do you feel about adaptations, right? Because so far what we've seen from him, besides Solo con tu pareja, is the first one is from the original film, right? So it's a remake of the original, or a reboot, I don't know. Remake, yeah. And this one is based off a novel, which there might be a previous film. I can verify that.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
But what do you feel as far as, like, it's different when it's taking a movie and remaking that movie versus taking a book and remaking that book? Because this one gives it a modern twist, obviously, which is the big thing. This was a big thing in the 90s.
I don't know if this movie came out in the 90s. Same time period as Romeo and Juliet, and which, you know, or I should say Romeo plus Juliet, with the amazing shootout scene in the gas station to begin with. I kind of talked about that on the Wenger show because they invited me on the Wenger show recently, and they had a good time. We had a good time talking about like over the top scenes, and that was definitely one of them. Romeo plus Juliet. Yeah,
there's a lot of over the top scenes in a lot of movies, but there is an original film, a 1946 one,
Great Expectations,
that adapts the book. But I want to talk about adapting books because it did, obviously it's slightly different when it comes to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of an adaptation. But so far,
even Children of Men is an adaptation.
There you go, that's perfect. That's another one. But it's one of those things where the as a future filmmaker, RB3, what do you feel like? Do you like taking content that is, whether it's a book, whether it's a series, a novel, an old film, does that give you extra motivation? Does that make it harder for you? Or is that just simply inspiration and you simply want to do a follow-up for that movie? Do you feel like going into film right away, you want to do something original, or you want to do something that has been done before in some way?
Right. I mean, it really all depends. I mean, for, I think, someone like Cuarón, he very much prides himself on being able to adapt from the page to the screen in a much more cinematic way than I think a lot of people would, right? Like, for him, a lot of, the way a lot of his movies present exposition and all that kind of stuff doesn't come in like the traditional, like somebody explaining something to somebody else. It's usually like just showing it, right? It's usually more visual. And I think, just like J. Kelly Rowling uses the Harry Potter books to as the form and the medium of the books to tell that story. Cuarón uses the film, the language of film and filmmaking techniques and visualizations to make it cinematic and inherently, that's why there's a lot of one takes. That's why there's a lot of handheld camera movement. I mean, again, my memory is like slipping when it comes to Great Expectations if it still had that like kind of style. But I mean, to a certain, for filmmakers, I think the challenge of taking something from one medium and translating it to the other is a challenge that I think a lot of people take. And you even see with David Fincher, like most of David Fincher's filmography is all like adaptations. I can't really think of like one like original David Fincher movie. So for a lot of directors, I think it's a compelling challenge to do that.
I forgot who said it. I think it might have been Ridley Scott. But do you feel like original is also something that's not? It's in quotes. Original.
I've always felt that way, and I think
because Baby Driver is an original movie.
Yeah, and I said that. Didn't I say on the Schmoes No Show?
Yeah, you did. That's why I'm saying it right now.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like Baby Driver is a totally original movie.
It is,
but it's probably one of the most unoriginal movies you're probably ever gonna watch because even though it's not based on a book or based on one particular thing, it's based on a lot of things that took from a lot of other things. So,
but you don't feel like it's still original, but it's very much like a love letter towards that. Like people say love letter,
homage, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, there's still plenty of material from the past that you could point to directly that inspired and influenced this. Whereas I feel like there's like the movie adaptation, for you were talking about adaptations. The movie adaptation that's written by Charlie Kaufman, starring Nicolas Cage, Meryl Streep. That movie is an adaptation of like this flower book, but is bar none probably the top 3 most original movies ever made. You know what I mean? Like, because it takes the form of the book and literally turns it inside out, upside down, and makes it a completely new thing. So I appreciate, so for me, it's like, original, non-original, it's not really a factor, I feel like, nor should it be, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, I think when it comes to like separating them in the Oscars, that makes sense. But like even then, it's like, again, what's original is subjective, to say the least. Is it compared to an official adaptation of something? So,
do you feel like studios and producers and people that you're pitching movies to? I mean, nowadays, original is almost like a bad word. Because they want to do, it's all about IPs. It's all about IPs now, man. Yeah. Like if you don't have IPs, versus like a film purist or a film school nerd like you, or someone like me who enjoys film, appreciates original films. Right. Do you feel like there is necessarily like, I don't want to say a fight or a battle or a tug of war that's going on between original films and IP films? Because I don't even call them like adaptations, because they're just IP kind of thing. It's like, what's that toy? Well, it's a toy that we made up in 1979. Movie. Right. It's like, why? That's what it's just a toy. Yeah. But do you feel like there's necessarily like a something whereas in the future the Oscars are very much going to struggle to find Best Original Screenplay nominations?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think so necessarily, because when they count the original screenplay category, they count if it's a biopic or something. So then even if for example, I think Lincoln was nominated for Best Adapted, or is it Best Original, Best Adapted? I'm not sure. But I guess that's a bad example, but
if it's a biopic, it can be...
or like The Darkest Hour, for example, that was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, I think.
Okay.
But then like at the same time, the story itself was based on 2 or 3 or 4 different books or accounts.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Isn't that still an adaptation?
I mean, I think so.
If it's a biography or an autobiography of someone, and you're reading those books and you're adapting those books.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. But I mean, there's been tons of biopics over the years that have been nominated for original screenplay and just
the one I remember the most, I mean obviously because it's most recent, that there was like a little dispute of, was the Ruth Negga film and Joel Edgerton.
Oh, Loving. Yeah.
Where it was like, it's kind of original but not really, because it's based on an article, I think is what it was.
Yeah, well the article gave it like the publicity, like that the article, I think it was the Times article, like put that out to the world.
Sure.
So is it based on that? But it's also based on this person's life.
Yeah, so, I was gonna say it's still a biography.
So I don't know where you quantify that, but that's always going to be a problem when you divide this whole thing of original versus adapted. I feel like so.
Yeah, I feel like quality should trump anything else. Bad word that I just said, but still, I feel like quality will at the end rise to the top. Hopefully, sometimes it doesn't though. I feel like there's, I'm reading a lot because that's what I do now.
Reading, all right.
Mainly articles and stuff, but it's one of those things where I love seeing conversation go certain ways, and I feel like when it comes to the relationship between critics and film, it's getting even more
contentious.
Yeah, but it's getting even more almost powerful as well. Where if I'm a critic and I say I saw a movie 3 months before, and I tell whatever my audience is, whether it's a big outlet or a small outlet or a YouTube channel, I can almost cut a movie down by like 20% or something by saying it sucked, and it's like all of a sudden people who listen to that person can start to cut it down,
right?
And already assume that mindset going in, so they will think it sucks. I can't tell you how many times that's happened, where it's like, oh, the movie's so bad on Rotten Tomatoes, it's gonna suck, and then you go in wanting to hate it, versus having your own opinion. A lot of people do that. Especially general movie-going audiences. But I feel like there's, obviously there's politics with everything, and there's nuance with certain things, which Rotten Tomatoes doesn't give you. It doesn't give you any of that nuance or rankings or scores. It just simply gives you...
Metacritic, people, go to Metacritic.
It gives you a number. But I feel like when it comes to quality of films, especially when it comes to film festivals, at the end of the day, I can give you a movie that a lot of people liked, but if certain outlets choose to qualify and raise up another film that might not have been as well liked as every other film, then that's going to raise up. I feel like that's the way it goes. Like if I say I like this movie, and that's the Oscar problem as well, because of whatever it has to say versus the quality of this film, you're probably going to go down. Right. Like that's kind of what happened with A Monster Calls that we talked about last week. Was a film that was getting so much hype, and then all of a sudden other films started to get raised up so much to the point that A Monster Calls just disappeared from the mindset of people and from the mindset of movie-going audiences and Oscar voters and all that kind of stuff. Right. So I feel like it's difficult. It's very difficult to try to see quality nowadays, because quality is so subjective, but it's also so minimized to numbers, or 30%. Oh, that must mean it sucks. That kind of thing, which is relevant to people who don't have the money to see these kind of films. But at the same time, it's frustrating to see, as someone who nerds out about this stuff, that I'm sorry I went on a rant on, guys, once again. But I feel like it's an important conversation to have, because I feel like at the end of the day, whether it comes to IP or not, I'm just a film fan, and I don't care if it's like original or not original. Even though I appreciate it, I just feel like quality's quality, man. And that's why Cuarón does a lot of adaptations. You're right. And now that you mentioned Children of Men, I was like, oh, that's another one. Even though I feel like Gravity was written by...
No, I think it was written by his son.
His son, right? Then, I was going to say son.
They both wrote it together, I think, something like that. Yeah, but I think Gravity's original. But it didn't get nominated for Best Original Screenplay, so there it goes. But... let's move on to his next film, which is
After Great Expectations, which is a film you did see.
Oh, yes.
And you've seen recently, I believe, right?
This was the last film I saw before coming to this podcast.
And the film is called Y tu mamá también, which is a film that you did see recently, which is good because we get to talk about it in full detail. But this is it's an interesting film. I don't know. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, because later on in the episode I wanted to hear your first Cuarón film, which is a little thing that I've been doing sometimes. But I don't believe it's this one, right?
No, not this one. This was, like I said, most recent one.
Got it.
So yeah, this one.
Shout out to Netflix though. Sorry, I gotta.
Yeah, Netflix. Yeah, thank you for Netflix. Yes, please.
Because it's hit or miss, man. Sometimes you're like, please let it be like on Netflix or Hulu.
Yeah, well, this time we had two Cuarón films. We had A Little Princess and Y tu mamá también on Netflix. And then Children of Men I got on Amazon, but yeah, we're talking about Y tu mamá también.
Yeah, I want to hear your general thoughts on them. General thoughts, because it's something that we haven't said on the previous films.
Right.
But on this film, I just want to hear your, because it is a pretty well liked movie.
Yeah, a lot of people regard it as a classic. And then
with your eyes, RB3, is it?
I mean, I really appreciate this movie for a lot of what it does, and you know, for a movie that is so, for lack of a better term, liberated, right? That's so open in this, what it's trying to say, at least, and this movie about the coming of age and sexual discovery and all this kind of stuff, and I think this movie brilliantly embraces like the kind of uncertainty that you have, like when you're young, and how much you think about sex when you're young too. So, and how you're growing and thriving as a sexual being. I think this movie's super fascinating and super R-rated too.
Oh my god, it is.
Opens right up with a sex scene. I'm
yeah,
just like, yes, this is
a lot. There's a lot to take in. This was also the starting point, the jump off point of Diego Luna and Gael García Bernal,
right?
Two Mexican like legends.
Diego
at this
Luna
point.
went on to Star Wars.
Diego Luna is Captain Cassian Andor.
Yeah, just had to show his ass cheeks in a couple of
and then freaking Gael from Coco.
Oh, right. That's right.
He plays.
Yeah, he was the main guy, right? Not the main guy, but the guy who was helping the entire time.
Hector.
There we go. Hector.
I knew that, guys. I swear. I didn't know.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, this is the launching point for these two guys, where they're just incredibly young in this movie, which is kind of funny. But yeah, it's their launching off point, and then I want to get the name of the actress right, because I feel like she's pretty important too. I think this is her. And it's so funny because for me, watching this movie, this is kind of what the meaning of is about, but we're going to get different perspectives. Since I have a Mexican dad and I've lived in Mexico for a hot minute, in different parts of towns, and it's different because it's different border towns.
Right.
But I'm very familiar with Mexican culture from being there. In this movie, I think it's funny because it's so Mexican.
Really?
It's so Mexican, to the point where they're like, when they run into like the little quinceañera that's going on in the street, when then like there's mules going by, and she's like, hey man, can you give me some money for the quinceañera? It's her birthday. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. What up? Yeah, little princess, let's go. And it's like the most Mexican thing ever, that someone's on the street celebrating their quinceañera, asking for money, which shows like the differences in poverty too. You definitely see that in the movie.
Absolutely.
But I feel like even more than that, it's the differences in culture. Personally, what I feel, because it's so funny when they introduce each other to the Spanish girl,
right.
Luisa, I think is her name.
Yeah, Luisa. Yeah.
And she's like, for people who don't know, it's so different. Like it's so different. It's literally the difference between like a European person and a random American dude who's living like in the Bronx or something. Like it's different. Like it's very, even though you speak the same language, it's the difference between Europe and like rural Mexico is and culturally it's very different too. And that accent, man, I said it last week because Bayona is from Spain as well. It's so funny. I love the Spanish accent. It's so distinct that I capture it very much. And the Mexican accent in this movie is so Mexican. It's like, no, vente cabrón, no empieces con eso. Like it's so Mexican. Like it's the most Mexican thing I've ever heard. And as someone who pays attention to accents very much, I just was fascinated by that. And obviously with culture, because I feel like she's bringing her own Spanish culture as well, which is a very open culture.
Right.
But at the same time, I I don't know how you felt about it too, because throughout the whole movie, I'm sure you know, because I'm assuming you know enough Mexicans to know this, but it's one of those things where how many times did they say, like, I'm gonna say it, guys, sorry, but like fag in this movie, like, they said it like 40 times, because that's all we say in Mexico. Like, we literally talk to each other like that.
The cigarette word.
And it's one of those things where, in Spanish obviously,
right,
but it's one of those things where they say that all the time to each other, like literally all the time. And it's so fascinating, because that's kind of where the movie leads. It comes back
to
full
the
circle.
Sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I didn't catch that. Damn,
I don't know what the
fucking news.
To be honest, guys, I didn't see it with subtitles. I saw it without subtitles, because I can speak Spanish. But it's one of those things where I was so curious, and I was going to ask you: did they translate that word? Because they said it like 40 times in the movie.
I think they did a few times. I think they did a few times.
Okay,
but then like.
Because I was curious as I was watching the movie, I was like, man, this guy, like, that's how we talk, to be fair. Like, that's very much the Mexican way. And at this point, it's almost a throwaway word. We don't actually mean it. Right. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I think it's kind of ironic that they drop that word like so many times throughout the film. And yet, at the end of the film, we, eventually come to that scene. Right. But it's so Mexican. The machismo, if you've heard that word, right, is like it's one of the most biggest things culturally with Mexico that I feel like is very distinct to Mexico. Even though like machismo can exist in every Latin American country, because the Latin American people still have that mindset, but in Mexico it's slightly more amplified. We'll insult you by saying you like men, we'll degrade you by saying that, we'll say what's wrong with you if you don't show physical strength or some sort of strength, or if you're crying. Like, it's very much like it's again a Mexican father that I have. It's very powerful. I don't know if I'm so curious if they translated that, first of all.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I paid attention to it. I definitely noticed the subtitle say it a couple times.
Sure.
I don't know if I noticed it like repeatedly. I thought it might have just been a one-off. But I mean, like, yeah, I don't think I picked up on that. But that's interesting, because this movie is a lot about how men are supposed to behave like men in this, and then how it's all kind of subverted when Lucia is kind of the one who's like bitching them around and giving them directions, and
that scene where she names the rules of what they're gonna do.
Yeah. The 10 rules.
I was like, man, these guys are just quiet.
Yeah. So just funny, and then I mean, overall, the way that they build the relationship between these three almost feels like a familial kind of situation, but also feels a lot more like a journey that each of these characters are going on their own, right? Like how Lucia is a wife whose husband keeps cheating on her, so she just goes out and has this like sexual experience and adventure herself. Meanwhile, those guys, I mean, their girlfriends just left, and they feel like they're lost without, their so it's like what happens when like spouses and relationships, like are away like this, you know what I mean? So, and how they come to fully realize and identify who they are all the way towards the end. So, it's super fascinating, and it's also a really cool exercise of style, I feel like, too, because there are a lot of those traditional Cuarón like long takes. There's a lot of that in this movie too. Yeah. So the way that a lot of it's just kind of shot with like this kind of realism, this like unfiltered mask that like goes right into the way they feel, right into like the nitty gritty, you know what I mean? So this movie does that a lot, and I just overall this movie is just awesome to me. So I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, I think she's from. I recognize her face. I believe she's from. Yeah, she's the girl from Pan's Labyrinth.
Oh,
I don't know if you how recently you saw
the maid.
The maid, yeah.
Oh, the maid. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So for me, I was like, I know I recognize her, but I forgot which film it was. Mm-hmm. Which is funny because Pan's Labyrinth is a very Spanish film. It's literally about the Spanish Civil War.
Too, yeah. I was gonna say too. I also think it's fascinating that this movie kind of takes a different angle to its portrayal of like Mexicans and the fact that those two guys are like more affluent, like not poor, like not impoverished, like they very much have. I think one of them's like the son of like a politician or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like yeah. So So it does portray a different, and even though it's a Mexican film, a Spanish film, it takes a lot from like the French New Wave kind of aesthetic. And when I say French New Wave, I'm talking about like the handheld camera for a lot of it, the random cuts to the voiceover where it's like that little bit of pause feels very like Jean-Luc Godard and all that kind of stuff. So, and it's funny because even though I never seen it before personally, there's a class at USC, History of International Cinema. There's a part 1 and part 2. I was in part 1, but everybody in part 2 watched this movie. I was kind of talking to them about, some of my buddies who watched this movie in that class, and they were kind of saying that for a lot of what they were learning in this is that a lot of what the style of like the French New Wave and the neo-realism and all that kind of stuff, how that kind of migrated its way down south to a lot of like Latino, Central American, Mexican, type of storytellers and filmmakers, how I kind of seep through that way. And I mean, this is a prime example of that too, I think. So
yeah, it's very distinct. Like Mexican cinema, I personally feel now it is you don't hear much about it. Personally, I feel that way just because, I have that background.
Right.
But it's one of those things where I feel like it's very much true. I mean, but by Mexican cinema, I mean from Mexico, in Spanish, made in Mexico kind of cinema, versus Latin American directors. There's plenty of those. But I feel like, or like, the directors that we just named beforehand, they all make currently Hollywood American films,
right,
versus, Mexican films or even Spanish language films. Most Spanish language films that we see come from Spain, versus Mexico, which is very different, like I said before. But it's almost like once again, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments that say that's not true, but I feel like not a lot of people are aware of it. And I'm obviously, this is my big motif by being here in LA, is I'm very passionate about seeing, directors come full front. Later on in this year, and I guess I'll mention it here, we're going to get a film called Blind Spotting. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I haven't, no.
It premiered at Sundance, and it's by David Diggs and another guy from Hamilton, I believe it is.
Okay.
And it's Oakland film set in Oakland, about the relationship between two best friends who are one white, one black in Oakland, and the difference between those two. But what people aren't, like, I literally looked at a tweet the other day that someone was talking about this movie, and they said, Blind Spotting done by African American Oakland homie and this white homie from Oakland as well, or something like that. Created by them, done by them, written by them, all him. And I was like, that's not true. This is a Mexican director who's doing this movie. And that's another thing that I feel like it's lost, to the point of like, they're literally not, his name is Carlos Lopez Estrada, and I actually don't know him personally, but I know him through work, because he collaborated with us on a few projects at work. I personally wasn't there, but still, I think it's cool. And it's one of those things where I recognize his name over everyone else, but I feel like that's kind of a throwaway. Like it's a Mexican American director. Whatever. Let's talk about this dude. But it's obviously it's because of where he's coming from and all these things. But and he started as a music video director. But what I'm getting to is the point of filmmakers, Mexican films, is people like foreign films, but for some reason they don't. I don't know if you feel that way, but they don't attach that with Spanish. Like, oh, Spanish, sure, nah, I'm good. Let's see a French one or another one, but I feel like Spanish is another one that's kind of lost. Personally, this is me. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Right. I mean, I watch a lot of foreign movies in general, so
gotcha.
I'm a little lost in the sauce.
Like
here.
Asian cinema, for example, I feel like when people watch foreign films, Asian cinema kicks ass. Like Korea, Japan, China, Hong Kong, people cater towards those films, I feel personally, over some Spanish films. Obviously, A Fantastic Woman won last year. I believe it won, which is a Chilean film.
Chilean,
There's a Latin American example, but we don't see too much of that. And Chileans are, for anyone who doesn't, Chileans are crazy. They're all everyone just comes out of pops out of Chile, an artist. They come out smoking a cigar and drawing shit as a baby. And they already have a little mustache. Chileans are artists. They just love art.
There's born artists.
But it's very different there as well. But I just feel like as I said before, when it comes to Mexico, it usually comes from DF. But yeah, this is me going on a rant on Mexican filmmaking. But I feel like it's important because it's the whole film is about that. It's about the Mexican idea, the lifestyle, the experience, the difference between the poverty versus a woman who's very Spanish and Spaniard and has that European feel. And it's two contrasting, feels that are going in. And especially the relationship between men and women. And what's expectations, right?
Right.
So it might be different in Spain. I don't know because I don't live there, but it's one of those things where it's not the case in Mexico.
right. Yeah, you even see that a little bit too, because where the scene where the boys first meet Luisa for the first time, and then like they're literally pushing her into a corner as they both like close proximity, as they're both talking to her, they're both closing her in. So they're pushing her a lot more and they're being a little more pushy, a little more forward. But then she's a little more quiet. But then ultimately like reveals what she wants later on, and feeling more liberated. I feel like too. So
yeah, and we get that scene with that phone call scene with her too. That kind of shows where she's headed. And then we get obviously the guy's opinion of her, but it's kind of hard not to. I mean, she's very beautiful throughout the movie, but it's very distinct when it comes to. I personally feel like it's also like proximity. When you're stuck with people, you tend to, be like, man, you're a lot. For some reason, your hotness just went up like 20%, and all of a sudden you feel that. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like that's almost realistic. If you're stuck with someone for a while, or if you go to, if you're a kid and you go to camp when you're a teenager, you're like, bro, I'm in camp, man. Yeah. Like she's all I see. So at the same time, that's kind of how it develops. I personally feel that way too. But I don't know. What do you feel like? Because there's so many different aspects that this film is trying to say. What do you feel like is the biggest one?
I mean, to me, just the biggest thing is like I feel like this movie is trying to communicate is the not versioning, but the development of sexuality when you're that age. You know what I mean? I feel like it's a true coming of age story that is the story of, okay, what happens if we, if like they're kind of forced to grow up like really quickly in this movie and make decisions that a lot of people don't really decide upon until later in life. So in terms of who they sleep with, who they disclose that they slept with each other's girlfriends at a certain point in this movie. So it's like, how do you confront like that knowledge, and especially if it's your best friend, and how do you feel about that? How do you feel about him after that? So it's all about maturing and growing up. I feel like for the most part, I feel like that's really that's at least what I took away from it.
Yeah, friendship is like one of the biggest themes in this movie too. The fact that they're best friends and they're doing stuff that best friends wouldn't like or appreciate. But it's so funny, like at the same time they kind of move on very quickly. Yeah. Personally, I'd not move on that quick. I take it a lot more personal. I'm walking from here. I'm not getting in that little car anymore. But it's one of those things where it's like, does friendship, does taking something that you want and that you feel is yours away, even for a moment or for a day, enough to ruin a friendship that you've had for years, right? I don't know. That to me is like the biggest question. And for these guys, it's like, yeah, sure, let's keep being friends. I don't care. They obviously care, but it's one of those things where it goes down. But let's talk about the end of the movie. I feel like the coffee scene. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where they meet up, and you find out the big news that she had cancer. And that she found out right beforehand, and that's kind of why she was so liberated, right? Because she only has a few months to live, is what I think they said. Like she only had a little bit of time to live because of the cancer, and they weren't aware of that. Like she never told him or anything like that. So that's kind of why she acted the way she acted. She wasn't necessarily like that in her personal life. I feel like that's kind of where the film was going. Like that's like the whole time she just kept talking like about sex. I was like, this isn't normal. Like normal people don't meet you and be like, how many people you slept with? Really? And I'm just like, this isn't normal. This is weird. But the reason why she was so forward is because she realized that I'm dying. So I'm gonna live it up as long as I can, and for as much as I can with these two dudes that I met.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you personally felt, if you took it the same way I did.
Yeah. No, I mean, exactly. I think that's why she was, I feel like that's a case with like a lot of people who are nearing like the end of their lives. They want to find an outlet to explore more the things that they want to do before their time's up. So I feel like that totally makes sense as to why she's behaving, why she's not behaving, but why she is hanging out with these guys and hanging around them like that. So, I mean, it really, you could do the whole movie without that reveal, really, and I think it also kind of makes sense too. Just, a young woman who wants to just, have sex. I mean, I think that's totally fine too. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's I think that's a very real and very personal position for a lot of people and a lot of women too who want to experience and live life for one last time before they go out. So
yeah, what about the ending too, when it kind of gives you clues as far as like friendship and like the stuff that you had when you were younger doesn't necessarily last as much as you think it's gonna last.
Yeah. I mean, I think it all just goes back to that theme of growing and maturing, right? And for Luis's character, she doesn't have much more room to grow. But for Diego Luna's character, and what are the characters' names? I keep calling them as
the characters' names are Tenoch and Julio.
All right, yeah, those guys. When they like as they grow and as they mature, they come to realize some of life's like harsher lessons throughout. So I think that's also the key, like the true foundation of where this movie lives at. So
I think too it's kind of funny just looking back at it too, how like teasing is such a big thing within the Mexican culture. Like how many times, like even when he meets up with his cousin too and they start talking, the first thing he does is like, it's like, oh, I haven't seen you in years, and then he immediately starts teasing him. I'm like, bro, you haven't seen him in years. That's the first thing you're gonna say to him. But it's one of those things where teasing is like the big thing, especially when it comes to like he says he wants to be a writer is the thing he says, right? And then he starts teasing him about it. But it's especially when it comes to that kind of stuff, when it comes to doing stuff that's not necessarily seen as like powerful, like working with your hands or doing badass shit, like that's like writer, man, that's little girl stuff. Like that's the kind of mentality that kind of goes into that, especially specifically with that scene. But again, it's all about masculinity for me personally, and within cultures, and learning that masculinity or not learning that masculinity, and kind of going against the current when it comes to your culture and your background. Yeah.
I think that's all. It's always. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on. I really do feel like that's an important movie in his filmography because it's an incredibly Mexican, the way they talk, the way they address each other, film. And obviously what eventually happens is incredibly important. Let's talk about Harry Potter, the Prisoner of Azkaban. First of all, I want to hear your relationship with Mr. Potter. The films, at least.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with the film franchise in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it before on the show, but like I watched the first two when I was a little kid, and my mom figured out that's about like witchcraft or whatever. So I literally didn't see another one until the sixth movie came out. So this one was more of like the catching up in between of like.
So when was it? When was the catch-up time? Was it like 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Like right after the sixth one came out.
Okay. So you did play catch-up then?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I did end up watching a lot of these. What was it? 2009 or whatever. Yeah, around that time. So yeah, I definitely watched this movie, and this one's my favorite out of the series.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I have always loved Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2, but
that's good. That's a fair point. I love Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2 too.
Yeah. I mean, Part 2 is probably the one that I probably like walked out of the theater but I saw that one in theaters. I didn't see this third one in theaters, but like I watched out of this Part 2 like super happy and buzzing about it, of course. But I think as a piece of filmmaking, this is probably the best one that they've ever done out of the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would rank this one as your first. That's very interesting. But for me, it also, we just talked about coming of age film, Y tu mamá también. Harry Potter is also very much about coming of age, right? Yeah. Because it's they start out as literal children. Not like you, because you're a child.
I'm 21
but these
now,
are literally children.
I'm 21.
So it's always about transitional periods within your lifetime as you're living in this ridiculous, crazy world of magic and learning about magic and all this stuff. But it's Prisoner of Azkaban, for me, is very much one of the most coming of age ones, because they're not quite little kids, but at the same time they're not quite like full blown, super horny teenagers, or like teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers, yeah.
They're kind of in that weird like in between stage.
Era.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old they are in this movie. I'm assuming like 13, 14 or something, 13, 14,
12,
something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it's one of those things where this one to me shows the age, the most transition between the age groups, and obviously the other ones we see remind me, because I didn't have time to rewatch this one because I was going to. Is this the one? Which is the prom one? The super.
Oh man.
That's the one after this, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable with.
I mean, I remember a lot of the moments in this movie. So like, I definitely think this movie definitely deals with. It's the first introduction to Gary Oldman's character.
That's right, Sirius Black.
Sirius Black, who is this mysterious figure that enters his way back into Harry Potter's life, after of course discovering that Harry is the chosen one, and This movie introduced the flying the flying things, the door. What is it?
Griffins?
Not the Griffins. The door. The deaf people. Like,
the Death Eaters.
Death Eaters. Is that what they're called?
I think so.
I guess, yeah. I don't know, but I mean, it's also a time travel story. I mean, this one is probably like the most complex out of all of the Harry Potter films, and I think the way it achieves that is just through having an understanding of the fact that this is a shift from being a kid and being young and that like goofier, wackier tone that the first two movies are conquering, and going deep into the idea of there's more at stake than just being young, and how you have to grow on your own instead of with all these people around you. Because this is probably the movie where you take away there's barely any Dumbledore. There's Emma Watson's Hermione and Ron, but there's not like the story is really about Harry's journey and his relationship with his father, and his father's relationship with Sirius Black, and his mother's relationship with Sirius Black, and how he has to kind of answer questions about his past and the present, and how, and ironically, that's why it's a time travel film, how those things have to be answered within the very near future. So, and
it's also like your trust with the past, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's that the whole film is essentially like, do you trust Sirius Black or not? Do you see him as the villain, or do you maybe see some hope that maybe this whole thing is a setup, which eventually we find out it is. But it's also the same thing with the teacher. What's his name? The guy who turns into a werewolf.
Oh, I know you're talking. Yeah,
that's also something that goes hand in hand with that theme as well, because it's also one of those things where it's like, do you trust this guy? I don't know. Like throughout watching the film, the first time watching it, I very much am on. I'm the same way, dude. Like, I didn't grow up with Harry Potter because of that. And I saw these movies, like, for the first time 2 years ago. And I made a big deal about it, like, on Twitter and stuff. So, for me, he plays... is this him? I forget, but he plays one of the professors in the movie. I think he plays the professor against the dark arts in the movie. But it's also the duality, right? Because we see the duality between what we associate certain themes with and what we associate certain names with when it comes to fiction, specifically dark, black. We associate that with evil. Like he dresses all black, wears a black hat. So we assume that's our assumption going into this film, and it's also what we eventually get with the professors that show darkness. But the main reason why I enjoy this movie is that's obviously the best example of Snape too.
Right.
I can't believe I didn't say that, but yeah, Snape is the perfect example of that.
Right, but he's
the
not
whole series. We're like, this guy, he's cool. What is he?
You just don't know. He's not in this movie a lot though.
He isn't. No.
And this movie does take some time and introduce a lot of new elements. I love the way the portrayal of the newspapers are in this movie. I think this is one of I don't know if it's the first time, but there was definitely a time I noticed when like the moving images in the newspaper were like an actual character and has something to say. The invisibility cloak, all the sequences with that. And by the way, we haven't mentioned it, yet, but there's a prevailing theory to some extent, not theory, but idea that Cuarón is a very attracted, to say at least, to the idea of feet, right? Like how in this movie there's the invisible footsteps, how in Children of Men he's walking, like he's running barefoot throughout most of that movie.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a valid thing or not, but I just think it's fascinating that that's something that's portrayed here in this movie. But I don't know if that's like just a weird tangent, but in particular with this movie though, I think it's fascinating how he uses the art of illusion and the magic to kind of almost like a self-reflexive thing about filmmaking too, like how the invisibility cloak is kind of our audience perspective, our window into being like the fly on the wall, the same way Harry is in a lot of those scenes. There are just other elements, how the usage of mirrors and reflections are kind of like the reigning motif throughout this movie. Like they have a couple times in this movie where like the camera pushes into a mirror, but then like it stays like back or whatever. So this is another reflection of the another indication of the central theme of reflection and introspectiveness and looking into yourself for the answers, which ultimately becomes the big thing at the end where Harry does end up summoning the spell in and of himself to say, doing the spell that he sees in the future. He ends up performing that spell himself because he needs to save was that Sirius he was trying to save towards the end? Yeah. So all that stuff just wonderfully plays into this overall arching idea of how isolation can prompt change and provoke change, and how isolation requires you to look within yourself and take an introspective look before you could have the answers to a lot of this stuff. So
yeah, I feel like the biggest thing too is one of the things that makes or breaks this film for most people is time travel.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest themes in the movie, specifically towards the end though. I don't feel like it overtakes the entire movie.
Just the end, yeah.
Yeah, because it's one of those films where it's not necessarily a time travel movie, but it has time travel elements towards the end of the film, but obviously it always comes back full circle. However, I love time travel. And most people that I talk to don't like time travel.
It was Harry saving himself. It was Harry like saving himself and
that's right,
going back into the past and then seeing himself like not and seeing himself having to defending himself against I guess it was the Death Eaters, and then he summons the like magic whatever. I think it was like a deer or something like that.
I think it's stag.
Stag? What's a stag? I don't know what that means.
Oh,
is that like a horse or?
I don't know. Oh, we're gonna get so much crap from Harry Potter fans. I've seen the movie, guys. That's about as far as my knowledge goes.
Right. I don't know.
There was a point where I knew quite a bit after seeing the movies. That's kind of it.
We should have had Copster on this one. He's like the biggest Harry Potter fan.
Oh, okay.
Or Emma.
Oh no, yeah, Copster, Emma, yeah.
Apparently.
How can I be so stupid? I freaking have a wand.
Oh yeah, I have a wand too. I have a wand too. I didn't bring it.
No, that's from
Universal.
That's from Copster.
Oh really? Copster gave that to you.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah, he bought me a wand, and he's like, "Hey man," and I was like, "Oh man, I'll pay you back." And he's like, "Oh, happy birthday for your birthday that I missed." So yeah, shout out to Copster for sharing his love of Harry Potter to me.
Yeah.
That's right. I totally forgot that because he met Luna Lovegood and all that, and he went with Finstock.
Yeah. And he I think he read the audiobooks for all of the books. So like he just a super Harry Potter.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that.
Emma Fyffe is one.
Yeah,
too.
I know Emma is. Yeah.
And, you know, John. I don't know if Roke is like a fan, but you know, he worked there. So
yeah. Emma still works there, which is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that's not me.
Right.
I grew up with Star Wars, and Star Wars is like my fandom.
Oh, you're telling me you went into the Schmodown Inner Geekdom League and you landed on the Harry Potter category, Ace? How many of those out of the 4 or 5 questions? They're gonna ask you 5 questions. How many of those 5?
I've seen most of the Inner Geekdom stuff, and I've gotten every Harry Potter question.
Really? Oh no.
I'm just saying, guys. You know which one trips me up like every time?
Star Trek.
You know which 2 trip me up like every time? Because Star Trek is definitely one of them.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, man. That shit's
oh
nuts.
my god! I think that's the. I don't. I remember because the first time I did a Schmodown, the very first time, was me, Copster, and Cody versus Dan Murrell and Mark Riley.
I remember that. Yeah.
Are you serious? Like the first time we heard that, we were like, "What? Even if you put 10 on those two, it wouldn't be enough." And it's like now looking back at it, you're like, "Jesus, that's a massacre!" Literally, the 2 best players of all Schmodown history against us 3.
Didn't you? Wasn't that the one where you did? Was like the fly versus the thing?
but besides that, check this out. The reason why I was watching the Harry Potter films was because it was literally during that timeline. So I currently finished the Harry Potter films or was watching them while we did that first Schmodown. And the only reason why I watched them was because of that, because I knew we were doing the Schmodown with Copster and Cody. So I went in and I was like, they do a lot of Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings ones. I got to pick one because Lord of the Rings is also something I didn't grow up with. Yeah. So I was like, I'll pick Harry Potter because there's more movies and I'm sure it's going to be crazy. And I watched all the Lord of the Rings ones. And literally the second question I get is, in Lord of the Rings? And I was like, no! I was like, which one is it going to be, Harry Potter? I was like, I'll watch the Harry Potter films. And I didn't know. It's like the most easy question too. It was like, what did Gandalf say like before he died or something like that? And I was like, I don't know.
Was
Peace
that
out.
The Thou shall not pass? Was that
no? It was during that scene though. I think it's like right afterwards.
I don't know.
But I was like, dude, damn it! I wish it was Harry Potter.
Yeah, man.
But that's my relationship with Harry Potter, which is like none. It was literally nothing. But for the as far as as they start to reveal the time travel aspects of this movie, how did you consume that? Because there's a lot of thoughts on time travel when it comes to other movies like Looper, like 12 Monkeys, like, you know, other time travel. Back to the Future is another one. There's a lot of...
Primer.
Yeah. T2 is another one. How do you feel like they handle the themes within the time travel? I kind of love it. That's kind of what makes it, like, what makes the movie for me. Is
right. No, I mean,
Hermione is just a gangster.
Yeah.
Like, she figures shit out, man. But how did you feel they tackle those themes of time travel?
I mean, I thought it was dope how they handled it, and I think that's really cool that... I mean, it's not like I'm not holding this to any like high standard of like of time travel. Well, I mean, because this is more magical, so I feel like you get away with a lot more.
You wouldn't, if you had time travel, you wouldn't go to more classes like Hermione does.
oh yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
It's like the only reason why she wanted that was because to like go to more classes and attend other classes and stuff.
Yeah.
To become even better. To be honest, that's kind of dope though. If you think about it. If you think about, like, I've always thought about Harry Potter as the relationship between knowledge and power, right? Where knowledge is literally power, like, and you have it in a wand, and the better you are, the more knowledgeable you are, the more powerful you are with, you know, the wand. And obviously we see other stuff like Harry and Voldemort, who just have the talent. It's a combination of both. But I feel like if you're telling me that I can become a master freaking wizard if I just read more, I'd be like I'd be like Hermione, because I'd be like, I want to be super powerful, man. Like, I don't want to just be an average student. Like, if you know that mathematics gave you like telekinesis or something,
oh shit,
or like you can read people's minds if you learn more math, you'd be like, bro, math, bro, because you want that power. And that's not necessarily Hermione's reasoning, but at the same time, if you think about it, you're like, all right, I see what you're doing, but that's not what you would use time travel for.
I mean, I think it's a good way to use. I mean, it's not what I would use. But I think it's dope that they incorporate like the why to the magic exist in this world,
Sure.
but also how scarcely they use it, because they don't really even like bring it back to any sort of extent, which I think is good, because I mean, they explain in the film the stakes for using magic is like as exponential. You know what I mean? Like you can't, like you're gonna end up fucking something up. You know, of course. Which is any time travel, worry. Of course, is like fucking something up in the future or in the past, and then affects the present. But yeah, I don't know. I just think the way they used it was just amazing throughout this film. So
yeah, and obviously we didn't talk too much about visually, but visually this movie's great. It's very dark. Like there's dark scenes.
It set the aesthetic, I think, for what was to come in the later Harry Potter films.
Like Half-Blood Prince. I feel like Half-Blood Prince is also another one that's super.
Yeah, I mean, I think after this point, they all kind of adopt the aesthetic of that Quran kind of set from this one, which I think is super fitting. I mean, we're talking about those one takes again. There's that whole one take where the camera is like moving through as Harry's like listening to that conversation, and just lands on him, just like creeped up in the corner, like half of his face in shadow, and again all this, the way the cinematography and the camera work works in this movie, all again portrays the aspect of loneliness and isolation, and how being put in that kind of pressure cooker situation can birth greatness.
Yeah, that's very true. And I feel like also it's like the way Azkaban looked was super cool too. And then like you said before, the Death Eaters.
Yeah, the dark like castle kind of aesthetic as well.
Yeah.
I just think overall, and also I think this is the movie where Hermione punches Draco?
Yeah, Draco.
Yeah.
Draco Malfoy.
Yeah. This is the movie where she punches him, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that scene.
Yeah. There you go, man. Hermione.
Yeah, Hermione.
Damn it, Hermione.
Strong woman characters.
Damn it, I love Hermione so much. Let's move on to Children of Men, which you told me beforehand, and this time I'm serious this time, guys, because I always say this. You're actually like a really big fan of this movie.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite films. I think probably is up there in top 25, maybe I don't know, 25, probably like top 25, yeah, something like that. But I mean, this movie really impacted me hard when I first saw it, and I went back and rewatched it, a couple of times, and then revisited it again for this podcast, and just reaffirms like everything that I love about this movie, because this is probably the definition of like hard science fiction when it comes to a movie that's very personal in the sense that it's about fertility and about children and about birth, but also has a much larger context when it comes to politically, socioeconomically. All of these things that they're portraying in this movie feels very, very real and very, very out there. And this movie being set, this movie came out in 2006, but it's set in 2027. So it's the very near future, 21 years into the future from when this movie was released to when it takes place. And probably this is probably the closest to like the future, to the real world future that we're going to head to. And like, not just from a technology standpoint, from a political standpoint, I really do feel like, especially watching this movie now, like this movie's very, 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 very relevant, and to the point where it's like almost kind of scary how relevant this is, and we could actually end up in this position in 9 years from now. So it's just super. This is just by far, and then it has a lot to say about religion as well. So I don't know. I just love this movie.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah, man. I mean, the themes that this movie tackles, you can make like an entire podcast just on that.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I mean, it's crazy how many themes the movie tackles, and you're right. The fact that it's set in the future is it's a dystopian world, but it's not Mad Max dystopian. It's not crazy. Like Hunger Games, for example, is a very distinct, very different than this kind of movie, because this one feels almost like one of the most grounded dystopian movies. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, people are still driving regular cars. People are still using like regular technology.
But even the political stuff that you were saying is also very grounded versus personally, I feel like some of the other dystopian stuff, like Hunger Games, for example, even though that is possible, it's still a little bit too far-fetched for me versus this one where you're like, yep. Yeah. Like literally the movie starts out by talking about how illegal immigrants are like public enemy number one.
Right.
Like you can't talk to an illegal immigrant.
Right.
If you
call them fugees for like refugees in this movie, yeah.
And it's one of those things where the ads that are playing say, you know, illegal immigrant. If you see one, don't give him anything and immediately call the police or something like that. And it's like, Jesus, like it's hardcore. But then again, look at our day and age right now. Like we would assume that this is, there has to be morality to certain aspects, but morality just goes out the door, right? I mean, personally, this is how I feel. And when we're seeing these past few weeks of what's going on currently on the border, it's almost like morality has just taken not just a backseat, has just been dumped out of the car, because we're, you know, associating power and relationships and nationalism to the point that we see language and skin color as the enemy. Like, you know, at least a big portion of America. And that's something that I've been talking about for years, because I really do feel, and it's different aspects, man. But for me, it's one of those things where people don't really talk about it as much as they do now, obviously because it's in the forefront of all the news and stuff and the coverage. But I've been dealing, like, growing up with my family, man. You know how many times, like, people told, you know, speak English. Like, I've heard that, like, so many times. It's one of those things where the type of, I learned very quickly, I guess is what I'm saying, what racism was at a very young age. And it's one of those things that doesn't get talked about, like that the Latino community is ignored in a lot of portions. Right now it's not, because of all this that's going down, but I really feel like that's something that, you know, has been ignored for such a long time. And the fact that it's done to a community that shares the same faith with the vast majority of the people who are cheering for them to get deported and get kicked out and get mistreated and get, you know, their rights taken away from them, to me is even the most egregious crime that's being happened right now, is the fact that in the name of God, you're condemning the same people who love that God and who share the same faith as you. Like, that to me is to the point of, like, the fact that I can grow up in a Latin American community and read the Bible and know it, and some other people can grow up and learn the Bible and know it, and you can condemn me? Like, I don't think we're sharing the same God at this point. You see what I'm saying? I don't know. To me, obviously I can go on about it forever, but it's one of those things where does certain things, where does morality take a backseat when it comes to our political atmosphere? And I think now we're seeing slight variations of that, specifically with children, right? But that Children of Men is literally about that. Yeah. The fact that the biggest hope we can see is giving life to other, giving life to other people. What do you feel about that, specifically fertility and what's the there's when you can't have sterile, when you can't have children, right? What do you feel like that specifically Cuarón is trying to say, choosing that to be the apocalyptic event?
Well, I think this movie's all about, like, the celebration and the tragedy of life in and of itself, right? Like, we see that a lot through this movie. Like, the movie opens with the news report of the youngest man who's 18 years, 4 months, however many days old, and him being killed, and how that's a national tragedy because everybody celebrated that last new birth piece of life, and how being stripped of that just completely, like, eliminated a lot of hope for a lot of people, and how this society is so hopeless, so lifeless, because there's no, like, new blood, new children, all that kind of stuff, which is fascinating because, I mean, we see that whole theme of celebrating life throughout the entire film, but we see it, like, the celebration met with the tragedy from the very scene where Julianne Moore and Clive Owen and Chiwetel Ejiofor are in that car, and they're just playing around, having fun, playing, you know, ping pong or whatever, and just boom, it just goes left, like, out of nowhere, and Julianne Moore's character, like, literally has her, like, throat, like, ripped out, you know, with a bullet or whatever. So it's like, is that kind of shit that is, I feel like that just encompasses what this movie is like, how we celebrate life, and just cuts to, and again, that's another thing that happens at the end too, where the baby's crying and they're walking slowly through the building and everybody's like looking, and all for 1 second, all of the gunfire, all of the warfare just kind of stops as everybody admires his life, and then boom, just turns back left like all of a sudden too. So that's really, I feel like that's the reoccurring thing in this entire movie, is like how we choose to celebrate life and how life deserves to be celebrated, and then is going to be met with like some ultimate tragedy in the end as well. So
yeah, the death, the birth and death of humanity, right? Because humanity is something that we all share because we're all human,
right?
But at the same time, how do we lose our humanity? And this movie says by literally losing humans and the ability to create humans, is how society slowly loses their humanity,
right? And you know, and even, but you know, this movie, even I think this movie is a lot deeper than that, because I think, you know, to some extent there's a line in there where they talk about like, oh yeah, there has been kids born for a long time, but I think True Ejiofor's character says, yeah, but we've been gone long before that too. And you know, and I think, but you know, and I think what the movie was implying through that line, and I think just through the little context clues that they give us throughout this entire movie, is that society was already headed to the point of like of just ultimate division and destruction already. You know, it wasn't like we're already pushing towards that point. So why, you know, like if we're already there as a society, what's left, you know, like if children are gone, it just further digs us in a deeper hole. And you know, I think that's really important, and how this movie kind of shows you how the government, how the politics involved. I mean, there's a documentary that was released on the Blu-ray of this movie called The Possibility of Hope, which is like this 30-minute like mini documentary where I think it's Cuarón, I don't know if it's Cuarón specifically, but they talk to a lot of different experts of environmentalism and of politics, and how that future in this movie is not too far off from reality, because the way that things are communicated in this movie are through fear, right? Fear in the media, fear in the way that people are portrayed in the media. We see that in the very beginning with the Diego baby. You know, we see other aspects of fear that's being pushed, the fear of the other, the fear of the migrants, the fear of the refugees, and that's something that's very present in today's society. You talk about the border and the child detention centers, but it's even something that, I mean, the Supreme Court just approved Trump's travel ban, you know, which was originally the Muslim ban, and now it's just like they call it the travel ban, but it's really just another form of xenophobia, right? How we're implementing fear of, if we let in people from this country, they're gonna start bombing this and bombing that. And I like how this movie kind of addresses that, but almost kind of flips it to where in this movie the terrorist attacks are implemented by left-wing groups who are just so frustrated by this overly, I mean, the way it's portrayed in this movie, this government's like overly right-leaning, overly conservative, overly nationalist, because I think that has a lot to do with the fact that this, you know, the UK in this movie is the only country that's left. Britain is the only country that's left. If you read like the little backgrounds of the newspapers, like the U.S. is gone from nuclear fallout. Same thing with all these other countries, China, Hong Kong, all these other countries are. Sorry, I keep hitting the mic. But all these other countries are have just been eviscerated by nuclear attacks. So they're the only ones left. So they become this hyper nationalist state, to where they're just outright refusing anybody who's like not white, you know, or not originally from Britain, and literally locking them in cages and refugee camps. And once it's discovered that they have the key to the last person who's the literal character is named Key, the key of society being this last pregnant woman, who was also a refugee, but they can't go public with that because the public perception just wouldn't work. So it's a very fascinating and layered science fiction that has a lot of relevance politically when it comes to fear being the operative of what can leads to his downfall, and we're seeing a lot of that now. So,
well, you said this movie also talks about religion. What do you mean by that? I want to hear more about that.
Well, I just think it's interesting how this movie. I mean, it's all about the Jesus and Mary and the carpenter, right?
Yeah.
So like how and that's, I mean, I think that's what it ultimately represents. This woman who gives the first natural birth in 18 years. She doesn't know who the father is. She doesn't. And Clive Owen is not the father, but he is helping her along this journey, same way that John the Carpenter is Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
Yeah, Joseph the Carpenter is. And in that story, this is the religious implications of that, and how everything just kind of has to come to a stop when there's this like little baby involved too. So
that makes a lot of sense. I can't believe I was like, it's the road to Bethlehem, right?
Right.
It's like you got to get to this one point and carry this child, because this child is the savior of humanity. Right.
And to literally the point of where the ship that picks them up at the end is called the Tomorrow, So like is I think Cuarón's hitting you a little bit on the head with that.
But
I think that's very important, right? Because I feel like that's the society. I mean, that's where the story relies on this whole idea of this one last piece of hope, because this entire movie is just hopeless. Like, it's just completely every character you pretty much care about is either evil or dies, and everybody who is everybody who's supposed to represent the good is just faced with like nonstop bombardment through opposing political ideologies, going literally at war with each other. So I don't know. This movie just says so much. Again, we could go a full hour into just this film, to go scene by scene. I just also just another brief thing. I just also love when he visits the government agent who's the cousin.
Yeah,
that's the first. I mean, for most of the movie, everybody's like poor, and especially Clive Owen, he's super poor, because he accepts money from a homeless dude or whatever. But like we see like the one snapshot into like the affluent life is the government agent who's like his cousin, and he just has like all of it, and his only job is to store art that is supposed to be preserved. But it's just weird. You look at all this art just like randomly sitting in this dude's house, and he doesn't care about it. He literally doesn't care about it. And there's like the little kids like on like his iPhone or whatever, like surrounded by all this spectacular art, But it's just at that point, society is beyond culture, is beyond art, is beyond that stuff. Is a survival story at that point.
And that's a great scene too, because it has that line when he says, how do you do it? Mm-hmm. And by how do you do it, he means how do you live like this, mm-hmm. knowing that everyone's dying around you? And mm-hmm. he says, I just don't think about it. Mm-hmm. You remember that? When he says that?
Right. And I think that's the key to understanding Clive Owen's character, because he's very much a passive dude from the very beginning. He doesn't want anything, any kind of involvement in the like you just we keep talking about the opening scene, but in the opening scene, like everybody's watching the newscast, he just fucking orders coffee and walks out, He doesn't care, and he doesn't want to care, he doesn't even want to be involved in this whole what do they call it, the left? They're not called the left, but they're called
the rebellion, the resistance.
Yeah, there's something, but there's a particular name. But he doesn't like really care to be involved. The only reason why he's even considering being a part of that whole thing is because of Julianne Moore, because of the character of Julian, which is fascinating. Also, I think this movie also has something to say about femininity to a certain extent too, because in the original book, it's the men who are sterile, but in the movie it's about women being fertile, and how the one restoring hope for the next generation. The entire movie, everybody thinks she's giving birth to a boy. It's really a girl.
That's true.
So I think this movie says a lot about how the role of women in procreation is very essential. So
that's a good point. Yeah, again, we can talk about this movie for hours, but we have to move on to his final film that he has, his most recent film as far as filmography goes, and that is Gravity. Now, Gravity is obviously his most recent film, like I said before, and it is one of the most visually powerful films of the last 10 years. It's
Oh,
just-
absolutely, yeah.
If I don't know if you would agree with that, but it seems like you do agree with
I
it.
absolutely agree.
We've
with that.
talked a lot about. I wish we could have talked about it more on Children of Men, but the camera work in Children of Men, like you said, that Julianne Moore death scene in the car
Right.
is crazy,
Right.
like crazy, crazy. But obviously, this guy is Emmanuel Lubezki, who is a master, an artist, like we said before, one of the greatest DPs working around today. And he flexed all his muscles in this movie, man. We got to start out with the camera work. What do you think about Gravity's use of camera?
Oh, camera. Well, going back to Children of Men, there's also that long sequence at the end where they go through the whole war zone too. I think this movie takes it up to the whole next level. I mean, we watched this movie. The first 13 minutes of this movie is completely one take. And of course, a lot of this movie is, CGI heavy.
Sure.
But the creativity in implementing that sequence is just mind blowing to me. This was actually the first, we were going to talk about later. I guess it was the first. I guess we could talk about it later. But
this was your first.
This was my first exposure to Alfonso
that's great.
Cuarón. And I remember watching this movie. Me and my buddy Waldo, who I mentioned last week when we watched The Impossible together, and he cried.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But I actually distinctly remember watching this movie with the same homie. We saw Gravity IMAX 3D opening weekend, packed out house, dude. And that to me, I mean, I talk about Avatar being the movie that was the experience that made me want to go into filmmaking, but watching that movie in IMAX 3D was the moment of probably my favorite movie going experience just of all time. I mean, seeing that movie on that massive screen in 3D was nuts. And I remember it was so crazy because there was that moment where Sandra Bullock's character is tumbling backwards and she's floating away from camera. And I remember seeing that on the big screen, and it was seeing the tiniest dot on the biggest screen, but you still felt every single detail of that. And it just blows my mind how much I love that movie. And setting it in space where the depth of field is going to be extra crazy, you get real experimental with it. Overall, this was my favorite movie of that year when it came out, 2013.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I just think overall, just an amazing visual masterpiece.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to, I mean, this one won the Oscar too, right?
Mm-hmm. It didn't win Best Picture. 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture. This movie won Best Director,
cinematography,
Best Cinematography,
okay,
and a bunch of other all the technical awards.
yeah, I remember that year because it was crazy how much this one was sweeping at the Oscars.
Won 7 Oscars.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I remember because I was following Cuarón. Right. And now after all that hype, I have to take you to what nowadays, people watching the movie in retrospect, and how people say it's overhyped now. I don't know if you've heard that. Have you heard that?
I've definitely heard that.
Some people say, "Oh, it's all visual spectacle, but no story and no actual script that gets people inside the movie. It's using only visuals. It's a purely visual movie." Do you agree with that?
I mean, I don't agree. I disagree with the fact that you should criticize a movie just for being a visual spectacle.
Sure.
Because I think that's what makes film. That's what makes movies. The fact that you can watch them, and the fact that you can enjoy them as visual pieces of spectacle, of something that you can experience and take in fully. But I also disagree with the fact that people say it's not a very strong written movie. I think it's a very strong movie, in the sense, a very strong story in the sense that's an isolation tale. It's a survival piece. You look at something like Castaway, or was the movie of Robert Redford, All Is Lost. I mean, those are both survival stories of pretty much one character. It's very similar to Gravity. It's just the difference is that they take place on Earth, and this movie takes place in space. So there's less to interact with, I guess. It makes it a little less, less of a, oh, hey, we need to talk to get through this. But I still think the movie did an amazing job of relaying the story of loneliness, of isolation. Again, another theme that we see throughout Cuarón's filmography, while also being an amazing visual spectacular. So I don't know. I think this movie is amazing as it is.
I think what makes this movie great too is the fact that so many space movies are set like in a crazy future, are set in a, you know, not current times in space. Even The Martian, which is set like not too distant future, but this one is very much set in a time period where it feels like it's now, like now in space. The type of danger and the type of risking your life astronauts do is very different from other occupations, but it's very much risking your life because if shit goes bad, and that's one of those things what this movie does is the fact that it's current. It's science nowadays in space. It almost makes space feel like I'm never going there. Because in some movies it's hopeful, and other movies it's to the distant future. How do you feel like what this movie has to say, first of all, about the dangers of space? Because I feel like that's the whole theme in the movie, to be honest.
Right.
How do you feel like this movie tackles that and shows you visually what the dangers of space actually are?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's scary, man. I mean, I don't want to go in space. Like, I can tell you that right now. I don't care who they send up to fucking Mars. I leave my ass right here. I'm dying with the rest of them. Goddammit. You know what I mean? You're definitely not going to see me up there. I mean, because, there are multiple cases in this movie. I mean, that whole scene where she's walking through the shuttle, or not walking through, but like she's going through the shuttle and then one thing catches on fire and she has to try and take out that fire and like literally everything just starts exploding around her. Like, that shit is nuts. Like, and you can do nothing about it. I mean, she has one little fire extinguisher that she's trying to like stop it with, but I mean, that doesn't work either. So I don't know. I mean, overall, again, like that's what I think Cuarón is an expert at, is building that tension, building that heightened suspense through showing us all in one take, not having like all this exhibitional dialogue. Oh, here's where this is, where that is, but instead of just showing us like moving the camera through like these spaces and making you feel like you're part of that. So I don't know, it just works.
Yeah, it feels very much so. Like thinking about it nowadays, just the astronauts who do this type of stuff are taking massive risks not with their lives, because you just never know what's going to go bad in a territory that humanity hasn't really explored enough of, which is obviously space, and we just haven't. We've done a lot, obviously, but we just, compared to other places that are dangerous, you know, we have some sort of dominance towards it, versus space, which is still kind of a foreign place for humanity, because we just haven't done enough, and you just never know, you know, what kind of terrible things can happen, which we've seen before in real life, right? You know, with you know, the Challenger, with other things that have happened that just doesn't click with science, right? It doesn't work the way that we want it to work, whether it be temperature, whether it be, you know, anything that can go wrong in this movie will go wrong. But it's really is a fascinating tale of that kind of risk taking that astronauts actually take. But it's also an acting piece of Sandra Bullock. How do you feel like she holds this movie together? Because she really does.
I mean, she's really the only one for a majority of this film, and
obviously George Clooney too.
George Clooney, yeah, but you know, he gets off. I mean, are we spoiling? Yeah, we can spoil. This movie came out like 5 years ago.
You already spoiled it, man.
Whatever.
I'm pretty sure we already spoiled it like beforehand. So
we spoiled all of Children of Men. People, if you haven't seen Children of Men, watch Children of Men. That's a great film.
I feel like that one is like, you gotta spoil.
Yeah, you gotta talk about that one.
But yeah, it's very much about Sandra Bullock, and it's very much about.
Yeah, I mean, she was nominated for an Oscar for this part for Best Actress in the Leading Role, and I think it's very well deserved because, again, when it comes to these isolation stories, you're only really gonna be hanging out with one person throughout the entire movie. And I think she does a good job of carrying the fear, the emotion, but also the growth, right? The courage that she has to build up to leave the situation and not die and make it home to her daughter. And I think that's a very powerful theme in this movie, is the whole idea of birth and rebirth, right? How she kind of has to like reinvigorate. I mean, she literally crawls up into like the fetal position, like as if in like a uterus or whatever. But like, you know, to the extent of like she has to rebirth herself to make it out of the situation, rediscover herself to get out of this. And I think that's very telling, because she plays a mother in this movie who's trying to get home to her daughter or to her kid, and how the mother connection really ties ties the whole motivation of getting back to Earth so potently. I think I even remember. I think Cuarón was talking about this and how they kind of wanted to make the main character a dude, but they fought for making it a woman because it has so much to do with personal femininity and motherhood and stuff like that. So
this movie did crazy numbers at the box office too, if I remember correctly.
Oh, it definitely.
And it's so funny because one thing that people don't know, I think they're learning very quickly, is the power of George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, specifically with Ocean's 8 that came out a few weeks ago.
No, I still haven't seen it.
I still haven't seen it either,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things that I think it's so funny how demos are very specific because
that's funny. Ocean's 11, Ocean's 8.
That's what I was gonna say. That's what I'm saying. Like the fact that people go see Ocean's 11, George Clooney, man, you got to see this movie. People see Gravity, and it's like Sandra Bullock and George Clooney.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those things where people don't fully realize the power of Sandra Bullock. I can't tell you how many times my mom has said, "Man, I really want to see Ocean's 8. Man, Sandra Bullock's in it, and it looks like it's got a great cast." Yeah. But she always says Sandra Bullock first. And the same with you ask someone else's mom, and they'd be like, "Man, I really want to see George Clooney in this movie." Like George Clooney's another one who a lot of moms like, George Clooney and Sandra Bullock. So it's funny how
The Blind Side also made a monster amount of money.
Like it's one of those things where this movie, I really feel by putting those two specific actors in the movie, you're saying, "Hey moms, let's go see this movie too." Because older generations kind of cater towards Sandra Bullock quite a bit, and even George Clooney as well, because they're seen as like this timeless American actors kind of thing. But I just think it's funny how Ocean's 8 was like, "How did it make so much money?" And I'm like, you should have known that it's going to make that much money. I was expecting it. I know a lot of people weren't expecting it to make that much, but it made a ton of money. And Sandra Bullock's another reason why, man. Yeah. And she holds her own, man. Like she's still a really good actress. Yeah. It's one of those things that people forget, but yeah. Let's finish up. What is your biggest takeaway of this movie? And what's your let's say favorite scene? What's your favorite scene in this movie?
I mean, I love that scene where she's going through like somebody else's spaceship and she sees like all these like weird dead bodies. I mean, that's just because it's creepy and it looked cool in 3D.
Out of all the scenes you picked, RB3.
No. I also really love the scene where she's like flying, where she's crashing back into Earth, and it's just that little like or whatever. I don't know. That's just dope too. I love a lot of scenes in this movie though. I mean, all throughout, there's just so much impressive filmmaking that just blows my mind even to this day. So
yeah, shout out to Cuarón, shout out to Lubetsky. This is a true visual masterpiece for sure, and obviously all of his films are visually incredible.
Favorite scene for you though, or
I like obviously the scene where we track the tracking scene, the one that's inside that we see is pretty incredible. But obviously even when she's like. Even when you see her spinning like that, because that was in the trailer too.
Spinning, yeah. That's what I was talking about with the seeing that in 3D. Like,
yeah, dude, shit, that's gnarly.
Yeah,
and they put that in the trailer, so people could be like, "Yo, that's crazy." But unfortunately, time has run out, guys. So that is our episode on Alfonso Cuarón. Make sure and check out some of these movies, all of these movies, whatever your picking and choosing is. Once again, I recommend checking out the Q&A that he has with Cannes Film Festival. And it is very eye-opening, very interesting. And support Latino filmmakers, guys. I feel like that's something that we should be doing quite a bit more. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Let us know what is your favorite Cuarón film, what is your favorite Harry Potter film, whatever it is you want to say in the comment section. Let us know down below. And for the Meaning of Podcast, I'm Ace.
This is RB3.
And we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.